Everyone asked the wrong question. For over a decade, viewers, critics, and casual fans have looked at the execution of Ned Stark and reached the same verdict. He was too honorable for this world, too noble, too rigid, too naive. A man of principle dropped into a serpent's den, and the serpents won. That is the comfortable reading, the easy one. But what if that reading, the one the show itself seems to endorse, the one Cersei smugly narrates, is exactly the story someone wanted you to believe? What if Ned Stark was not destroyed by his honor, but weaponized it? What if the execution at the Great September of Baelor was not the moment a good man lost, but the moment a dying man fired the most sophisticated political weapon in the history of the Seven Kingdoms? This is not a story about naivete. This is a story about transformation, about how a man who understood he could not win decided instead to lose on his own terms, and in doing so, broke the Lannister dynasty from the inside out, saved the lives of his children, and ignited a war that would eventually burn King's Landing to ash. Ned Stark did not fail. Ned Stark chose, and almost nobody saw it coming. To understand what Ned Stark did in his final days, we have to understand what kind of man he actually was, because the show is careful to let us misread him. He is introduced to us as granite, immovable, a man who personally executes deserters because he believes the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. A man who tells his son, with quiet certainty, that there is no shame in fear, only in what you do with it. A northerner to his marrow, a man of winter. But beneath the stone face is something the show keeps whispering if you listen. Ned Stark is a political animal who has chosen not to play politics. That is a fundamentally different thing from being incapable of it. He survived Robert's rebellion. He navigated the minefield of Jon Arryn's death. He raised children across two households, his own and Theon Greyjoy, a political hostage he deliberately kept alive and treated with measured generosity. He was Lord of Winterfell for nearly 2 decades. Lords of Winterfell do not survive 2 decades in a kingdom like Westeros by being oblivious. When Robert Baratheon rides to Winterfell and asks Ned to serve his hand, Ned doesn't leap at the honor. He hesitates. He is reluctant. His wife Catelyn, shrewd and politically aware, warns him explicitly. King's Landing is a viper's nest. Lisa Tully's letter suggests the Lannisters murdered Jon Arryn. Ned knows this is dangerous. He goes anyway. Why? Because he already suspected what was at stake. The question of succession, the question of whether Joffrey Baratheon was Robert's true son, was not just political gossip. It was an existential threat to the realm. Jon Arryn had died investigating it. If Ned didn't go, the secret would die with Arryn, and a false king would sit the Iron Throne. Ned went to King's Landing not because he was dragged there by duty without thinking. He went because he understood that someone had to. He just vastly underestimated how far the Lannisters were willing to go. That miscalculation nearly cost him everything, and it is the last miscalculation he ever makes. There is a sequence in the dungeon beneath the Red Keep that almost no one analyzes with the seriousness it deserves. Ned is imprisoned. He has been betrayed by Littlefinger, a betrayal he arguably should have anticipated but didn't. His men are dead. His daughters are in Lannister custody. The game, as Cersei so elegantly put it, is over. And then Varys appears. The spider visits Ned twice in that dungeon, and the 2 visits are entirely different in character. The first is a reconnaissance. Varys comes to take Ned's measure. He is cool, almost amused, probing Ned's psychology with that particular brand of soft menace he specializes in. He tells Ned something damning and true. You've lost, Lord Stark. The only question now is how many others you take down with you. He mentions Sansa. He mentions Arya. He is calculating what Ned values most, how deep the leverage runs. But Varys also says something else in that first visit, something quietly extraordinary. He tells Ned that he serves the realm, not a king, not family, the realm. And we have no real reason to disbelieve him, because Varys, for all his venom, is the one character in the entire series whose actions most consistently align with the protection of the common people, even at tremendous personal cost. The second visit is different. By then, something has shifted. Varys comes not to probe, but to offer. He tells Ned that if he confesses, if he publicly admits to treason, publicly acknowledges Joffrey as the rightful king, he will be sent to the wall. His life spared, his daughters released. This is the negotiation, and it comes with an implicit endorsement from Varys. This is survivable. This is rational. Take the deal. Now here is where the analysis gets genuinely dark. Was Varys telling the truth? He believed he was. Cersei had made exactly this arrangement. Even Sansa had been told. And Sansa, bless her, had begged for exactly this outcome. Confess, take the black, live. It was a deal. It was real. What Varys could not guarantee, what no one could guarantee, was Joffrey. Varys serves the realm. He calculated that Ned's survival was the better outcome for stability. What Varys did not fully account for was that Joffrey Baratheon was not a political actor at all. He was a child with absolute power and no impulse control, a variable that doesn't fit neatly into any strategist model. And Ned? In that dungeon, after Varys leaves, Ned begins to think, not just about survival, about the board, about what each move actually produces. Let us be exacting about the timeline of Ned's final choice, because the show compresses it in ways that obscure the sophistication of what he's doing. Ned initially refuses to confess. He holds out, even chained, even broken, even with his daughters held as political leverage, he resists. This is not stupidity. This is leverage. A man who won't bend is a man whose capitulation, when it finally comes, carries weight. Ned is, unconsciously or not, making his eventual confession more valuable by making it harder to extract. When he does confess, when he finally agrees to stand before the September and name himself traitor, he does so under a specific set of conditions. His daughters are to be freed. He is to take the black. The war that has already begun in the Riverlands, the war Robert's bannermen are fighting against Lannister forces, is supposed to pause. He is buying his children's lives with his reputation. That is the explicit transaction. But Ned is also a man who knows something Varys doesn't fully appreciate in that moment. That Ned Stark confessing to treason. Ned Stark, the most famously honorable man in the Seven Kingdoms, the man who fought beside Robert Baratheon in the rebellion, who lost his father and brother to the Mad King's fires, who everyone in the North and beyond regards as the bedrock of Northern identity. That specific man, making that specific confession, carries consequences that cannot be controlled. The confession doesn't close the game. It opens a new one. Think about who is watching when Ned kneels and speaks those words at Baelor's September. The small folk of King's Landing, thousands of them. His daughter Sansa, weeping in the crowd. His daughter Arya, disguised among the masses, watching her father's public humiliation. Soldiers, lords, Cersei herself. And think about what everyone there knows in their bones, watching Ned Stark do this. This is wrong. This man is not a traitor. You don't have to love Ned Stark to know that Ned Stark doesn't lie about this. His entire public identity has been built on the impossibility of exactly this moment. The confession is unbelievable. Not metaphorically, literally. No one who knows Ned Stark believes it. So what does the confession actually accomplish, besides buying Ned a few more minutes of life? It exposes the Lannisters. A false confession extracted by force from an innocent man doesn't exonerate the executioners. It indicts them. Every person watching knows, on some level, that what they are seeing is not justice. It is spectacle. It is power humiliating a man who had none. And then Joffrey opens his mouth. The execution itself is the hinge upon which all of Westerosi history turns. And it happens because of one person's inability to control his own ego. Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, was supposed to honor the deal. Cersei had made it. Even she understood the political calculus. Ned alive and disgraced at the wall is politically useful. Ned dead is a martyr. Cersei is many things, cruel, paranoid, incestuous, but she is not stupid. She understood this. Joffrey was stupid. Or rather, Joffrey was something more dangerous than stupid. He was impulsive and absolute. He wanted the crowd's love and feared looking weak. He wanted to feel powerful. And in that moment, with Ned kneeling before him, with thousands watching, with his mother's careful arrangement ready to execute, Joffrey decided he wanted a head instead. Sare Island. Bring me his head. 5 words. The entire Lannister political strategy, undone by a petulant teenager. Now let's sit with what happens next. Not the mechanics of the execution, but the physics of it. The September of Baelor falls absolutely silent before Ned's head falls. Sansa screams. And somewhere in that crowd, 12-year-old Arya Stark is grabbed by a scarred man who shoves her face away from what is happening. Yoren of the Night's Watch, a recruiter, a rough man, a man who happened to be standing near a girl with her father's face, makes an instant decision to hide her, to save her, to lie about who she is. That save is not random. Yoren is in King's Landing specifically because of Ned Stark's position as Hand. Had Ned never come south, Yoren would not be there. Had Ned not known Yoren, had he not built those relationships, no one would have moved to shield Arya in that crowd. The execution that looks like Ned's total defeat is the same event that provides Arya's escape from the city. Consider also what happens to Sansa in the immediate aftermath. She's a prisoner, yes, but a prisoner whose value has just changed. Before the execution, Sansa was leveraged to control Ned. After the execution, Sansa becomes a political asset in her own right. Heir to the north, betrothed to the king, a pawn to be married rather than simply a hostage. Her captivity becomes a different kind of captivity, still terrible, still brutal, but one in which she is kept alive and, crucially, educated. She watches Cersei. She watches Littlefinger. She watches Marjorie. Sansa Stark's political education begins at the moment of her father's death, and it transforms her into the woman who eventually outmaneuvers everyone. Ned's death did not break his daughters. It forged them. Back in Winterfell, the news arrives like a winter storm. Robb Stark, 18 years old, never led an army, a boy in the body of a lord, receives word that his father has been executed. Not killed in battle, not lost to illness, publicly beheaded on the steps of the September of Baelor, after being coerced into a false confession by a boy king whose legitimacy Robb's father had died trying to question. And the North erupts. This is the part that never gets analyzed as strategy. It is always framed as consequence, as the Lannisters inadvertently triggering the War of the Five Kings. But let us reframe it correctly. Ned Stark's execution was the single most politically galvanizing event in the Seven Kingdoms in a generation. The North does not declare independence for abstract political reasons. It declares independence for personal ones. For Ned, for the man they knew and trusted and loved with the particular ferocity the North reserves for its own. When the Lords of the North call Robb Stark king in the North, they're not making a geopolitical calculation. They are answering a blood debt. And that is exactly what a martyr does. A martyr is not simply someone who dies for a cause. A martyr is someone whose death creates more power than their life could have sustained. Ned alive and on the wall would have been a political embarrassment for the Lannisters, a neutralized threat, a cautionary tale, a lord whose name would fade within a generation. Ned dead becomes something far more dangerous, a symbol, a wound that won't close, a rallying point that transcends politics and becomes personal. The Lannisters killed a man. In doing so, they created a war they could not win cleanly. The Red Wedding would eventually stop the military campaign, but it couldn't stop what Ned's death had already set in motion. The erosion of Lannister legitimacy in the eyes of the realm, an erosion that would eventually make Daenerys Targaryen's arrival not just a military threat, but a welcome one. Tywin Lannister was perhaps the greatest political mind in Westeros. And the cruelest irony of his arc is that his family's greatest strategic disaster happened specifically because he was not in King's Landing to prevent it. Tywin understood, viscerally, immediately, what Joffrey had done at the September. This is documented in his behavior throughout Season 2. His contempt for Joffrey is barely concealed, his fury at the executions palpable. He tells Cersei, bluntly, that Joffrey is not a reliable political instrument. He tells the small council, with thinly veiled disgust, that we have been dancing with the Starks long enough. What Tywin cannot say, what the show allows us to read between the lines, is this: we could have won this cleanly, and your son ruined it. Ned's execution was supposed to be the end of the Stark threat. Instead, it was the beginning of the Stark legend. Tywin spent the rest of his life managing the fallout of one moment he had no control over. The moment his grandson decided that a clean political resolution was less satisfying than spectacle. The Red Wedding is, in a very real sense, Tywin's desperate attempt to put back together what Joffrey shattered. He couldn't undo the martyrdom. He could only try to decapitate the military campaign before it destroyed the Lannister armies entirely. And even the Red Wedding, even that catastrophic act of political violence, could not erase what Ned's death had burned into the North's collective memory. The North remembers. That phrase, spoken by Barbary Dustin, by Wyman Manderley, by soldiers and small folk, does not refer to Robb Stark. It refers to Ned. The wound is Ned. The war is Ned, refracted through every lord and farmer who looked at King's Landing and thought. They beheaded a man who told the truth. The Lannisters paid for Joffrey's tantrum until the last page of the story. Here is the philosophical core of what Ned Stark actually understood, consciously or not, in his final days. Reputation is not soft power. Reputation is the hardest currency in pre-modern politics. It is the thing that makes soldiers follow you into winter, that makes lords commit their bannermen without needing legal guarantees, that makes enemies hesitate before they strike. Ned Stark had spent his entire life accumulating reputational capital. His reputation for honesty was so absolute, so total, so embedded in the political fabric of Westeros, that when he confessed to treason, no one believed him. That is extraordinary. A false confession delivered publicly, at sword's point, by a man who everyone knew would rather die than lie. And the confession destroyed not Ned's reputation, but the Lannisters. The Lannisters had wanted a confessed traitor. What they got was a martyr. And martyrdom, true martyrdom, the kind that emerges from a life of genuine integrity, is not something you can manufacture. You cannot fake it, and you cannot neutralize it. The Lannisters could control Ned's body. They could not control what his death meant. In this sense, Ned's execution is one of the most sophisticated acts of political sacrifice in the series. Not because Ned planned every detail, but because he was the right man in the right place with the right kind of life behind him. His death was not wasted. It was deployed by the logic of the world he lived in, by the physics of how reputation and martyrdom operate. Ned Stark's death accomplished more than his survival could have. His survival would have meant a broken man on the wall, slowly forgotten, his confession remembered, his children still hostages. His death meant a rallying point that reshaped the political map of Westeros for a generation. There is a moment, just before the blade falls, that the show lingers on, and it is not the screaming crowd or the weeping Sansa or the horrified Arya. It is Ned's face. He closes his eyes. He breathes. And he looks, unmistakably, like a man making peace. We do not know, the show does not tell us, what Ned is thinking in that moment. Whether he is praying to the old gods, thinking of Catelyn, thinking of his children, reciting something to himself in the silence of his own mind. But watch his eyes before he closes them. Watch where they go. They find Arya. Among thousands of people, in a crowd of chaos and noise and horror, Ned Stark finds his daughter's face, and then he looks away from her, deliberately, and finds the closest thing to a familiar figure, Yoren, standing near her. And something passes between Ned and Yoren in that last glance. Not words, an understanding. A father confirming that someone is standing next to his daughter. Whether this is intentional or the desperate hope of a dying man, the effect is the same. Arya is shielded. Arya survives. Because Ned, in his last conscious moment, was still trying to protect his child. That is not a naive man. That is a father doing the only thing he is left to do. The show wants us to accept a binary, honor or power. Ned chose honor. Cersei chose power. Cersei won. But this binary is false. What Game of Thrones actually demonstrates, across 8 seasons, across dozens of characters, is that raw power without legitimacy is self-consuming. The Lannisters had all the power after Ned's execution. They had the throne, the armies, the gold. And they spent the next 6 seasons hemorrhaging that power, losing allies, losing wars, losing sons, until Cersei died alone in a collapsing castle with no one left to protect her. Ned had no power after his execution, but his name, his reputation, his martyrdom, his story, outlasted every Lannister. The North that rose in his name eventually produced the armies that broke the Night King. His daughter sat the Iron Throne at the end of it all. His son became king beyond the wall. His bastard, the boy he raised as his own, was revealed to be the rightful heir to everything. Ned Stark left no dynasty. He left something more durable, a moral legacy that the entire story had to reckon with from beginning to end. In the calculus of Westeros, where men are measured by the kingdoms they build, Ned Stark built nothing. But the man who builds nothing, who instead gives his life to make something true, sometimes shapes history more than any king. Tywin Lannister died on a privy, shot by the son he despised. Ned Stark died on the steps of the September of Baelor, eyes open, looking for his daughter. One of those deaths mattered more. The North remembers, and so should we. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Ned Stark passed sentence on himself, and the sword he swung was wielded by the Lannisters. He knew what it would cost. He swung it anyway. That is not failure. That is the purest form of power this world ever saw.